Hello, my name is Gennady Gore. Welcome to the next video on Python for chemical engineering calculations. In this video, I'm going to talk a little more about arithmetic. In particular, I'll talk about division, I talk about precedence of operators, and finally complex numbers. So let's start here with just reminding how we multiply numbers in Python. We take 6 times 2, we get 12, right? If we use an integer number here and multiply it by another integer, the result is also integer. So if I take 6.7 and multiply it by 2.3, well, obviously I multiply two floating points number, I get a float as a result, right? This is not the case with division. With division, it's a little more complicated. So the regular division, this slash symbol, right? It's a floating point division, right? So we take two integer numbers, we divide one by another, and we get a floating point as a result. However, there is also an operation which is an integer division. So if I take 6 and put slash slash 4, I have an integer division, the result of which will be 1. And finally, there is a third type of division, the modulo operator, which is given by the percent sign. And if I do 6 modulo 4, I get the remainder of the division of 6 by 4. So speaking of precedence of operators, it's actually quite similar to what we're used to in math. So the first will be the exponent, right? The second would be multiplication and division, and different kind of divisions, integer division or modulo. The last one would be addition or subtraction. Of course, the brackets will have the same role, will play the same role as they play in math. They will define the precedence for certain operators. So let me give an example, which is very easy. 2 plus 2 multiplied by 3. That would be 8, but obviously if I add the brackets here, 2 plus 2 and multiplied by 3, we'll do the addition first. Well, another important thing to keep in mind while using different arithmetic operations in Python is that most of them are performed left to right, but the exponent is performed right to left. So here's the example. If I write 6 divided by 2 and divided by 4, I'll get 0.75, because what I'm doing actually is I'm dividing 6 by 2 and then the result dividing by 4. However, if I do 2 power 2 power 3, I'll get 256, which is 2 power 2 power 3, 2 power 8. So here the operation is performed right to left, while here it's performed left to right. So finally, wanted to show how to use complex numbers. If I want to use a number which has an imaginary part, I do 2 plus 3j, and this number, you can see it looks different. It has a real part 2 and a complex part of 3j. By the way, if I do 3 plus j, Python will give me an error because it would think that j is some sort of a variable. So if we want to have the imaginary part of just j, we need to type 3 plus 1j. So if I defined my x variable as an imaginary number and do type of x, Python will tell me it's complex. So let me also introduce another variable, 3 minus 1j, which will be a conjugate of the x. So if I add x plus y, and let me say z is x plus y, right? And then if I look at my z, well, you would expect that the complex part the imaginary part will cancel out. Yes, it will, but the number will still be complex. So if I do type of z, it will tell me that z is complex because I'm adding two complex numbers. Finally, complex numbers have certain attributes. And well, this is something we're going to talk in detail about later, that everything in Python is an object, and objects have attributes. And the attributes of an object could be accessed by putting a dot after the object and the name of the attribute without any brackets. So x.real will give me the real part of the variable x, and x.image will give me the imaginary part of the x. In addition to attributes, objects have methods which can be applied, which use slightly different syntax. So for example, a method can be used to conjugate the complex number, and you need to type x.conjugate and put these parentheses here. So, and the conjugate will be 3 minus 1j. Finally, similar to the floating point numbers, we can calculate an absolute value of a complex number, and absolute of x is the absolute value of this complex number x. Well, it's the same absolute value which can be used for just a normal integer or floating point number.